in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, between the whisper of wind through ancient stone and the gentle settling of earth beneath sleeping feet. There exists a memory older than words. It pulses through granite circles and limestone temples, through forgotten groves where moonlight still dances on carved symbols no living soul can read. This is the rhythm of the earth herself, patient, eternal, waiting for those who remember how to listen. Tonight, as cities dim and screens fade to black, we return to the sacred places where our ancestors once stood in wonder, their hands pressed against stones that hummed with invisible energies, their eyes lifted to stars that guided them toward mysteries we have only begun to remember. Here, in the threshold between waking and sleep, ancient energies stir like breath in the darkness, calling us home to the forgotten wisdom that flows through every sacred site, every consecrated grove, every circle of stones standing sentinel, under endless skies. If this journey into history gently moves you, take a second to like, share, and subscribe. It helps more sleepy minds find their way here. By the way, where in the world are you listening from? What time is it where you are? Drop a comment before you drift off. We read every single one. Long before the first city rose from river mud, before the first alphabet was carved into clay, there were those who could feel it, the subtle thrum that runs through the bones of the world like blood through veins. They had no name for what they sensed, these earliest wanderers who paused in certain valleys, who lingered at particular springs, who returned again and again to hilltops that seemed to sing in frequencies just beyond hearing. They only knew that some places were different. Some places were alive. The old woman's fingers traced the spirals carved into the entrance stone, her weathered skin following grooves worn smooth by countless hands across countless seasons. Behind her, the passage tomb yawned, dark and mysterious, its corbelled ceiling disappearing into shadows that seemed to breathe with their own rhythm. This was Newgrange, though she would not have known that name. To her, it was simply the place where the light returned, where each winter solstice the sun's first rays penetrated, the carefully aligned opening above the door and illuminated the inner chamber with golden fire that spoke of promises kept, of cycles honored, of the endless dance between earth and sky. She had been coming here since childhood, following her grandmother's shuffling footsteps along paths worn by generations of feet. The knowledge she carried was not written in books. Books did not yet exist in her world. Instead, it lived in the cadence of chanted prayers, in the precise positioning of offerings, in the way certain stones grew warm beneath her palms when the moon was full and the night air held the expectant stillness that comes before transformation. Her grandmother had taught her to feel for the lines of force that crisscrossed the landscape like an invisible web. Here, the old woman would whisper, placing the child's small hand on a particular boulder, "Can you feel it singing?" And gradually, miraculously, she could. The stone would seem to pulse beneath her touch, as if something vast and patient stirred in the depths of the earth, communicating through vibrations that her bones understood even when her mind could not translate their meaning. These currents of energy, these dragon lines that the Chinese would later name and map, these ley lines that would one day fascinate modern seekers, they were as real to her as the wind that carried the scent of approaching rain. She knew which paths to follow when the moon was dark, which springs held healing properties when the first frost touched the grass, which groves should never be entered except by those who carried the old blood and knew the proper words of approach. The great stones around her had been raised by her ancestors' ancestors, positioned with mathematical precision that would astound later archaeologists who struggled to understand how Bronze Age peoples could have achieved such accuracy without modern instruments. But she knew the secret that had been lost and found, and lost again throughout human history. The earth herself provided the guidance. Those who learned to listen could feel the convergence points where multiple energy streams intersected, creating nexuses of power that seemed to thin the veil between the physical world and something larger, more mysterious, more alive. As autumn deepened into winter and the days grew short, she would arrive before dawn and position herself in the forecourt of the great monument, facing east toward the gap between the guardian stones that framed the entrance. Her breath would mist in the cold air as she waited, perfectly still, hands folded over the small clay vessel that held embers from her hearth fire. This was her offering, light to summon light, flame to call to the solar fire that each day fought its way through the darkness and won. On the morning of the winter solstice, as the first pale glow appeared on the horizon, something extraordinary occurred. The ancient builders had calculated their angles so precisely that the rising sun's rays would pierce through the roof box opening above the entrance and travel down the narrow passage, illuminating the triple spiral carved into the back stone of the inner chamber. For exactly 17 minutes, the heart of the tomb blazed with golden light, and in that radiance, the old woman could feel the pulse of the earth quicken, as if the planet itself was drawing in breath and preparing for the long journey back toward spring. This was her gift to the community, to be the one who witnessed the return of the light, who carried the news back to the village that the sun had not abandoned them, that the ancient covenant still held. But more than that, she was the keeper of the knowing that connected this moment to all the others like it, stretching back through generations and forward into an uncertain future where perhaps other hands would trace these same spirals. Other eyes would watch for the same miraculous shaft of returning light. The energy she felt was not supernatural in the way later ages would imagine magic. It was natural in the deepest sense, part of the fundamental architecture of reality, woven into the fabric of space and time like the invisible forces that hold atoms together, or guide migratory birds across vast oceans. The stone circles, the passage tombs, the temple complexes that would rise across the ancient world, all were built by people who understood intuitively what modern science is slowly rediscovering, that consciousness and matter, mind and energy, are not separate phenomena but different aspects of a single, interconnected whole, miles away across the Irish Sea. Other guardians tended other sites where the earth's subtle energies gathered and pooled like water in hidden springs. At Stonehenge, the great trilithons rose in perfect alignment with the movements of sun and moon, creating a calendar of stone that could predict eclipses centuries in advance. The massive sarsen stones, some weighing 50 tons, had been shaped and positioned with tolerances that would challenge modern engineers, or to capture and focus the invisible currents that flowed through the Salisbury Plain like underground rivers of light. The builders of these monuments shared a common understanding that transcended the boundaries of culture and language. Whether they raised menhirs in Brittany, medicine wheels on the American plains, or pyramid complexes along the Nile, they worked with the same fundamental principles: that certain locations on the Earth's surface functioned as acupuncture points on a planetary scale, and that human-made structures could amplify and direct the energies that naturally gathered at these spots. They knew, as indigenous peoples around the world still know, that the Earth is not a dead ball of rock spinning through empty space, but a living, breathing entity with its own form of consciousness. The ancient Greeks called this awareness Gaia, imagining the planet as a goddess whose body was the landscape and whose breath was the wind. Australian Aborigines spoke of songlines, invisible pathways across the land that recorded the journey, of ancestral spirits, and could be followed by those who knew the proper songs. Hindu tradition described a network of nattis, energy channels that connected sacred sites across the subcontinent in a vast mandala of spiritual geography. In China, the art of Feng Shui developed as a practical system for locating and harnessing these earth energies. Masters of this ancient science could read the landscape like a book, identifying dragon lines and tiger paths, determining where to site temples and palaces to take advantage of beneficial key flows. They understood that the placement of human settlements within the natural energy grid could promote health, prosperity, and spiritual advancement, while poor placement could lead to disease, conflict, and decline. The knowledge was not merely theoretical. Those who lived by these principles often experienced measurable benefits in their daily lives. Crops grew more abundantly when fields were aligned with beneficial energy flows. Wells dug at confluence points never ran dry, even during the harshest droughts. People who slept in beds positioned according to geomantic principles reported more restful sleep and vivid dreams that sometimes brought prophetic insights. But perhaps most importantly, these ancient peoples recognized that the earth energies responded to human intention and emotion. Sacred sites were not just passive receivers of cosmic forces, but active participants in an ongoing dialogue between human consciousness and planetary awareness. The prayers, ceremonies, and offerings conducted at these locations actually strengthened and purified the energy flows, creating positive feedback loops that benefited both the local ecosystem and the spiritual development of the community. This understanding shaped every aspect of traditional life. Villagers were positioned to avoid disrupting major energy lines, while important buildings like temples and assembly halls were built directly on power spots to amplify their spiritual function. Agricultural activities were timed to harmonize with both solar and lunar cycles and the subtle rhythms of the earth currents. Even warfare was sometimes conducted according to geomantic principles, with battles planned to take advantage of favorable energy configurations. The old woman at Newgrange was part of this ancient tradition, though she stood near the end of an era when such knowledge was still transmitted directly from teacher to student through oral tradition and practical experience. Already, the world was changing in ways that would make this intimate relationship with earth energies more difficult to maintain. Metal tools were becoming more common, allowing humans to reshape the landscape more dramatically. Agriculture was intensifying, leading to larger settlements and more complex social structures. Trade networks were expanding, bringing new ideas and technologies that would gradually supplant the old ways. But on this winter morning, as she waited for the sun to illuminate the passage tomb's inner chamber, the old woman existed in perfect harmony with forces that had shaped human civilization for millennia. She was a living link between the present moment and the deep past, between the individual human experience and the vast, slow rhythms of planetary evolution. In her patient vigil, she embodied the timeless relationship between consciousness and cosmos that lies at the heart of all sacred traditions. When the golden shaft of light finally penetrated the darkness of the tomb's interior, she felt the familiar surge of energy that accompanied this annual miracle. But this year, something was different. Along with the joy and gratitude that always filled her heart at this moment, she sensed a note of sadness, as if the earth itself was mourning something that had not yet come to pass. She placed her hand on the cool stone beside her and listened. with the deeper senses that her grandmother had taught her to cultivate in the flowing currents beneath her palm. She felt the shape of the future taking form. She saw great cities rising where forests now stood in silence, their stone and metal disrupting the delicate energy networks that had guided human civilization for countless generations. She sensed the slow forgetting that would follow as people became separated from the natural world, their awareness of earth energies fading until such knowledge survived only in fragments, myth and legend, and half-remembered dreams. Yet alongside this vision of loss, she perceived something else. Threads of continuity that would persist despite the changes to come. Hidden in mystery schools and indigenous traditions, encoded in the architecture of sacred buildings and the alignments of ancient monuments, preserved in the instinctive knowing that still stirred in human hearts when they encountered truly sacred places. The wisdom would endure. Like seeds scattered by autumn wind, it would lie dormant through the long winter of forgetting, waiting for the proper conditions to germinate once more. She understood then that her role as guardian extended beyond the present moment. She was not just tending the sacred fire for her own community, but helping to maintain a spiritual legacy that would one day be needed by generations not yet born. The ceremonies she performed, the knowledge she preserved, the careful attention she paid to the subtle signs and seasons, all of this was part of a vast intergenerational project of consciousness. Preservation as the sun climbed higher and the golden light began to fade from the tomb's interior. She rose slowly from her place beside the entrance stone. Her knees protested the movement. She was no longer young, and the damp cold of Irish winters settled deep in her bones. Soon, she would need to choose an apprentice from among the village children, someone with the sensitivity to feel the earth's pulse and the dedication to maintain the ancient watch. She thought of her own grandmother, dead now these many years, whose voice still seemed to whisper in the wind that sighed through the standing stones. Listen, the old woman had always said. Listen with more than your ears. The earth has stories to tell, but they are spoken in languages older than words. This was the teaching she would pass on, not just the technical knowledge of when and where and how to perform the rituals, but the deeper wisdom of how to attune oneself to the living presence that animated all things. Walking slowly back toward the village along paths her feet had worn smooth over decades of pilgrimage, she felt the energy lines humming beneath the soil like harp strings touched by an invisible hand. Each step connected her more deeply to the vast network of sacred sites that dotted the landscape, stone circles and holy wells, fairy rings and ancient trees, burial mounds and standing stones that served as acupuncture needles in the body of the living earth. She knew that similar guardians walked similar paths in lands beyond the horizon. In the great stone temples of Malta, priestesses tended underground chambers where the goddess was said to sleep and dream. In the high valleys of the Andes, shamans made offerings to the mountain spirits and read the future in the patterns of melting snow. In the Australian outback, Aboriginal elders sang the landscape into being, their voices following songlines that connected every rock and tree and waterhole in an endless web of sacred narrative. All of these traditions recognized the same fundamental truth, that consciousness and matter are intimately connected, that human awareness can influence physical reality through focused intention, and that certain places on the Earth's surface serve as amplifiers for this mysterious interaction between mind and world. The specific techniques varied from culture to culture, but the underlying principles remained constant across vast distances and spans of time. This was why the sacred sites called to people with such compelling power. Standing within a stone circle or entering an ancient temple, sensitive individuals often reported feeling a shift in their awareness, a sense of expanded consciousness, of connection to something vast and timeless, of being part of a story larger than their individual lives. These experiences were not mere imagination or wish fulfillment, but genuine encounters with the concentrated earth energies that the sites had been designed to focus and amplify. Modern researchers have begun to measure some of these effects with scientific instruments. Magnetometers detect unusual magnetic field variations at many ancient sacred sites. Dowsers consistently locate underground water streams and mineral deposits near stone circles and temples. Some investigators have recorded infrasound frequencies, vibrations below the threshold of normal hearing, that may account for the altered states of consciousness that visitors often experience at these locations. But the old woman walking home from Newgrange needed no instruments to confirm what her body already knew. The energies were real because she could feel them, as surely as she could feel the warmth of sunlight or the coolness of flowing water. Her nervous system had been trained from childhood to detect and interpret these subtle signals, to read the landscapes, moods, and rhythms with the same facility that others might read written words on a page. This sensitivity was not supernatural, but entirely natural, a capacity that all humans possessed, but that only some learned to develop and trust. Like any skill, it required practice and patience, guidance from experienced teachers, and the willingness to set aside preconceptions about how reality was supposed to work. Most importantly, it required a fundamental shift in one's relationship with the natural world, from the stance of an outside observer to that of a participant in an ongoing conversation between consciousness and cosmos. As she approached her village, smoke rising from morning hearth fires, she reflected on the years that had passed since her grandmother first brought her to the sacred sites. Each season had deepened her understanding, each ceremony had strengthened her connection to the invisible currents that flowed through the earth like lifeblood through a vast planetary body. She had learned to feel the approach of storms in the changing resonance of the stone circles, to predict good and bad years for the harvest by the intensity of energy flows during certain lunar phases, to sense when individuals in the community needed healing by the way their personal energy fields interacted with the sacred sites. This knowledge would not die with her. She was already observing the village children, watching for signs of the gift that would mark one of them as her successor. It might be the girl who always paused beside certain stones and seemed to listen to something others could not hear, or the boy who had an uncanny ability to find lost objects by following what he called the feeling paths that led through the countryside like invisible roads. Perhaps it would be the child who sometimes woke from dreams filled with images of places she had never seen, but that corresponded exactly to sacred sites in distant lands. Whoever it proved to be, they would need to learn not just the practical aspects of the tradition, when to perform which ceremonies, how to read the signs and seasons, where to place offerings for maximum effect, but also the spiritual disciplines that would allow them to maintain the necessary sensitivity over a lifetime of service. This meant cultivating inner stillness, developing the ability to quiet the constant chatter of mental activity and listen to the deeper voices that spoke in silence. It meant learning to see the sacred in the ordinary, to recognize the presence of the divine in every stone and stream and blade of grass. Most challenging of all, it meant accepting responsibility for maintaining a bridge between the human and more than human worlds, serving as a translator between the needs of the community and the wisdom of the earth itself. This was not a role that could be taken lightly, for it required the guardian to sometimes speak difficult truths, to counsel patience when others demanded immediate action, to insist on the observance of ancient protocols even when their purpose was no longer widely understood, but it was also the most fulfilling path she could imagine. To live in constant communion with the living earth, to feel oneself woven into the great tapestry of existence, to know with unshakable certainty that one's life had meaning and purpose within the vast unfolding story of the cosmos. This was a gift beyond measure, a treasure that no amount of material wealth could purchase. As the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, she reached her small dwelling at the edge of the village. Inside, a fire waited to be tended, a simple meal to be prepared, the ordinary tasks of daily life to be completed. But even these mundane activities were transformed by her awareness of the sacred currents that flowed through all things. Lighting the fire, she felt her personal flame joining the great conflagration of consciousness that burned at the heart of reality. Preparing food, she gave thanks for the earth's generosity and the cycles of growth and harvest that sustained all life. Before sleep, she would visit the small shrine in her garden where generations of her family had maintained an altar to the local spirits. There she would offer a portion of her evening meal, along with prayers for the continued health of the energy networks that sustained her world. She would ask for guidance in choosing and training her successor, for wisdom to navigate the changes she sensed approaching, for strength to fulfill her duties as guardian and teacher for whatever time remained to her. And in her dreams, she would sometimes find herself walking the invisible pathways that connected all sacred sites, her spirit traveling along currents of light that flowed beneath the surface of the ordinary world. She might visit the great pyramid complexes of Egypt, where initiates learned to navigate the afterlife realms, or find herself in the stone circles of Scotland, where Celtic druids communed with the spirits of land and sky. Sometimes her dreaming consciousness would journey to places that did not yet exist in physical reality but that she sensed were waiting to be born. When the time was right for their manifestation, these nocturnal journeys were not mere fantasy, but genuine explorations of the subtle dimensions that interpenetrated the physical world. Through the network of earth energies, consciousness could travel instantaneously across vast distances, gathering information and insights that might prove valuable for her work as a guardian. She learned to recognize the signatures of different types of sacred sites, to sense the health or illness of energy networks in distant lands, to perceive the overall pattern of sacred geography that spanned the globe like a vast mandala of meaning. Most remarkably, she sometimes encountered other guardians during these dream travels, shamans from Siberia, medicine people from the Americas, temple keepers from ancient Mesopotamia, all of them working with the same fundamental forces but expressing their understanding through the unique cultural forms of their particular traditions. In these meetings, which occurred in dimensions where ordinary time and space did not apply, knowledge was shared, techniques were exchanged, and the great work of maintaining humanity's connection to the living earth was coordinated across the boundaries of language and geography. These experiences convinced her that the tradition she served was truly universal, not just a local custom that had developed in isolation, but part of a worldwide network of wisdom keepers who had been maintaining the sacred sites since the earliest days of human civilization. This knowledge gave her great comfort, for it meant that even if her particular lineage were to be broken, the essential teachings would survive in other forms and other places, waiting for the right moment to emerge and flourish once again. She understood herself to be a cell in the vast organism of planetary consciousness, performing her small but essential function in the larger body of awareness that animated the Earth itself. The sacred sites were the organs of this planetary being, the energy networks were its nervous system, and the guardians, like herself, were the specialized cells that maintained the health and coherence of the whole system. This perspective filled her daily activities with cosmic significance, while simultaneously keeping her grounded in humility and service. Tomorrow would bring another day of tending the sacred fires, of listening to the Earth's subtle messages, of sharing her knowledge with those who showed genuine interest and ability to receive it. The seasons would continue their ancient dance. The sun and moon would trace their eternal patterns across the sky, and the great stones would stand in silent witness to mysteries that human words could never fully capture. And through it all, the invisible currents would continue to flow, carrying information and energy between the sacred sites, maintaining the delicate balance that allowed life to flourish on a small blue planet spinning through the vast darkness of space. In this continuity, this endless conversation between Earth and sky, matter and consciousness, human and more than human worlds, lay the hope for the future. No matter how much the outer forms of civilization might change, no matter how disconnected from nature human beings might become, the sacred sites would remain as doorways to remembering, as places where the ancient wisdom could be rediscovered by those who approached with open hearts and quiet minds. The stones would continue to sing their silent songs, the energy lines would continue to pulse with life, and somewhere, always, there would be guardians to tend the fires and maintain the ancient watch. And so the old woman rested peacefully, knowing that she was part of a story that had no beginning and would have no end. A story written in stone and starlight, in the patient turning of seasons and the endless dance of energy through matter. In her dreams, the sacred sites glowed, like beacons in the darkness, connected by streams of light that formed a web of meaning spanning the entire Earth. She saw past and future as one eternal present, where all times and all places existed simultaneously in the timeless awareness that was her deepest self. This was the gift of the sacred sites, not just the amplification of human intention, or the healing of physical ailments, but the direct experience of unity with the cosmos itself. Standing within a stone circle or meditation chamber, walking a labyrinth or circumambulating a stupa, one could feel the boundaries of the individual self expanding to embrace the whole of existence. In these moments of expanded awareness, the artificial divisions between self and world, human and nature, sacred and mundane, dissolved into the recognition of the fundamental interconnectedness that underlies all apparent separation. The earth energies that the ancient peoples learned to work with were not separate from human consciousness, but were consciousness itself, manifest in forms that could be detected and directed through focused attention and intention. The sacred sites were places where this relationship between mind and matter was most clearly apparent, where the normally invisible connections between inner and outer worlds became tangible and workable realities. To understand this was to possess the key to all the ancient mysteries, the secret that had been hidden in plain sight throughout human history. As midnight approached and the village settled into sleep, the old woman's awareness expanded to encompass the entire network of sacred sites scattered across the landscape. She felt Newgrange humming with residual energy from the morning's solar alignment, the stone circles on distant hills resonating with the phases of the moon, the holy wells bubbling with underground streams that followed courses established before human beings first walked upright. All of it was alive. All of it was conscious. All of it was part of the vast, slowly breathing body of the earth herself. In this expanded state of awareness, she could perceive the future that was even now taking shape. Times when the sacred sites would be abandoned and forgotten, when the knowledge she guarded would be dismissed as superstition and fantasy. But she could also see beyond those dark ages to a time of remembering, when human beings would once again approach the ancient places with respect and wonder, when the earth energies would be rediscovered and the sacred sites would resume their function as bridges between the worlds. The cycle would complete itself, as all cycles must, and the wisdom would return when it was most needed. With this vision of hope sustaining her, the guardian of Newgrange surrendered to sleep, her dreams, carrying her along the pathways of light that connected all sacred sites in an eternal web of meaning. Somewhere in those dreams, past and future guardians walked together, sharing their knowledge across the boundaries of time, ensuring that the ancient wisdom would never be completely lost but would always be available to those who knew how to. Listen to the songs the stones were singing in the depths of the eternal night. The druids understood what modern seekers are only beginning to remember, that certain places on earth pulse with an energy older than human memory, deeper than conscious thought. They felt it in their bones as they approached the great stone circles, sensed it in the way the very air seemed to thicken and shimmer around these ancient markers. The stones themselves were not the source but the vessels, holding and focusing energies that flowed like invisible rivers beneath the surface of the world. At Avebury, where the great sarsen stones stand in their mysterious circles, the energy feels different from Stonehenge's focused intensity. Here, the power spreads outward like ripples on water, gentler but more encompassing. The massive stones, some weighing over 40 tons, were not randomly placed but positioned according to patterns that speak to something fundamental in the human psyche. The ancient peoples who built this complex understood that the earth itself was alive, breathing through ley lines and energy, meridians that crisscrossed the landscape like a vast nervous system. Modern dowsers and energy workers who visit Avebury often speak of the way their instruments react, dosing rods spinning wildly, electromagnetic field detectors registering spikes that have no conventional explanation. But these technological readings pale beside the visceral, almost cellular response that many visitors experience. It begins as a subtle shift in awareness, a sense that the ordinary boundaries between self and environment are softening. The stones seem to hum with an inaudible frequency that resonates in the chest, in the solar plexus, in places that have no names in medical textbooks. The Great Circle at Avebury encompasses an entire village, making it perhaps the most lived-in sacred site in Britain. Cottages nestle between the ancient monoliths, their gardens blooming in soil that has been sacred for thousands of years. This integration of the ancient and the everyday speaks to something profound about how our ancestors understood the relationship between the sacred and the mundane. For them, there was no separation. The energy of the earth flowed through every aspect of life, from the planting of crops to the raising of children, from the celebration of harvests to the honoring of the dead. In the Emerald Hills of Ireland's Boyne Valley, older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids of Egypt, stands a monument that speaks to humanity's most ancient understanding of Earth's energies and celestial rhythms. Newgrange, its white quartz facade gleaming like captured starlight, represents perhaps the most sophisticated integration of astronomical knowledge and earth energy work that the Neolithic world achieved. The Great Passage Tomb, built over 5,000 years ago, demonstrates a level of engineering precision that challenges our assumptions about ancient capabilities. But it is more than engineering it. His poetry written in stone, a symphony of earth energy and sky power harmonized into a single breathtaking instrument of transformation. The builders aligned the entire structure with such exacting precision that on the winter solstice, and only then, a shaft of golden sunlight penetrates the darkness of the inner chamber, illuminating the triple spiral carved into the back stone with light that has traveled 93 million miles to complete this ancient appointment. The spirals themselves are among the most enigmatic symbols in all of human art, neither purely decorative nor simply representational. They seem to encode something fundamental about the nature of energy itself, the way it moves, spirals, and transforms. Modern physicists speak of energy in terms of waves and particles, frequencies and amplitudes, but the ancient artists who carved these spirals may have understood something equally sophisticated in their own symbolic language. The spiral appears again and again in sacred sites around the world. From the Aboriginal Dreamtime paintings of Australia to the Celtic knotwork of Western Europe, suggesting a universal recognition of energy's spiraling nature. Within Newgrange chamber, visitors often report experiences that defy easy explanation. Some speak of a profound sense of connection to ancestral wisdom, as if the stones themselves hold memory. Others describe a feeling of being suspended between worlds, neither fully in ordinary reality nor completely elsewhere. The chamber's acoustics are extraordinary sounds made within seem to resonate not just in the ears but in the bones, as if the entire structure serves as a resonating chamber for frequencies both audible and subtle. The builders incorporated quartz crystal into the structure's facade, and modern researchers have discovered that quartz has piezoelectric properties, generates electrical energy when subjected to pressure. Could the ancient builders have understood that their monument would literally generate energy from the Earth's own movements? The subtle flexing and breathing of the living planet. The placement of these crystals was not random but carefully planned, creating a matrix that may have amplified the site's natural energy field. The water that flows nearby adds another layer to the energy complex. Ancient peoples worldwide recognize the connection between water and spiritual power. Water carries memory, holds vibration, and conducts energy in ways that modern science is only beginning to understand. The sacred wells and springs found at so many ancient sites were not chosen arbitrarily. They mark places where underground water systems intersect with other forms of earth energy, creating vortexes of power that sensitive individuals can feel and work with. At Newgrange, the convergence of astronomical alignment, geological energy, sacred geometry, and human intention created something greater than the sum of its parts. The monument stands as a testament to an ancient science that approached the mysteries of existence through integration rather than analysis, through harmony rather than control. It reminds us that our ancestors were not primitive, but possessed a different kind of sophistication, one that recognized the interconnectedness of all things and worked with natural forces rather than against them. In the mountains and valleys of ancient China, master geomancers walked the land with instruments of brass and bone, reading the subtle signatures of qi as it flowed like invisible rivers through the landscape. They called these energy streams dragon lines, envisioning the Earth's vital force as a great celestial dragon whose breath animated all life, whose body formed the mountains and valleys, whose blood flowed as underground streams and surface waters. The practice of Feng Shui, literally wind and water, emerged from this understanding of the Earth as a living, breathing entity. But long before Feng Shui became a system for arranging furniture and garden design, it was a profound spiritual science practiced by those who could read the language of energy patterns in stone and soil, in the curve of rivers and the placement of peaks. These early masters understood that human settlements, temples, and burial sites needed to be positioned in harmony with these natural energy flows to promote health, prosperity, and spiritual development. The Forbidden City in Beijing represents perhaps the most ambitious application of these principles on a massive scale. Every building, every courtyard, every gate was positioned according to precise calculations of energy flow and astronomical alignment. The entire complex was designed as a harmonious integration of human architecture and natural forces, a physical manifestation of the ancient Chinese understanding that heaven, earth, and humanity form an inseparable unity. But the dragon lines were understood to carry more than just beneficial qi. The ancient masters also recognized the existence of sure qi, harmful or stagnant energy that could cause illness, misfortune, and spiritual blockage. They developed sophisticated techniques for redirecting negative energy flows using water, features, strategically placed stones, and even architectural elements to transform harmful forces into beneficial ones. This understanding reflects a remarkably sophisticated grasp of energy, dynamics that modern energy workers are rediscovering through practices like acupuncture and energy healing. The great temples of China were almost invariably built at points where multiple dragon lines converged, creating natural amplification of spiritual energy. The Temple of Heaven in Beijing, with its circular architecture and precise astronomical alignments, was designed as a resonating chamber where earthly and celestial energies could merge. The emperor's annual ceremonies there were not mere ritual, but practical applications of energy work on a national scale, intended to harmonize the entire kingdom with the greater patterns of cosmic flow. Modern research has revealed remarkable correlations between the ancient dragonline maps and contemporary geological surveys. Many of the paths identified by traditional geomancers follow underground watercourses, mineral veins, and fault lines. Some researchers suggest that the ancient masters were detecting variations in the Earth's electromagnetic field caused by these geological features. Others propose that they were sensing more subtle energies that modern instruments cannot yet measure. The sacred mountains of China peaks, like Mount Tai, Mount Emi, and Mount Wutai, were revered not merely for their impressive physical presence, but for their roles as focal points in the Dragonline network. These mountains were understood to be the Earth's acupuncture points, places where energy could be accessed, worked with, and directed for healing and transformation. Pilgrims climbed these peaks not only for the physical challenge, but for the energetic alignment that could be achieved at these natural power spots. The monastery gardens of China represent another sophisticated application of dragonline principles. These spaces were designed as three-dimensional mandalas, with every element from the placement of pavilions to the routing of pathways, from the selection of plants to the positioning of rocks carefully chosen to create optimal energy flow. Walking through such a garden was itself a form of meditation, a practice of harmonizing personal energy with the greater patterns of natural flow. The ancient Chinese understanding of dragon lines extended beyond mere energy work to encompass a complete worldview in which consciousness and cosmos were intimately connected. They recognized that human awareness could influence these energy patterns just as the patterns influenced human consciousness. This reciprocal relationship formed the foundation for practices like Qigong and internal alchemy, where practitioners learned to cultivate and direct their own energy in harmony. with the greater flows of earthly and celestial ki. High in the Andes, where the air grows thin and the boundary between earth and sky seems to dissolve, stands perhaps the most enigmatic of all ancient sacred sites. Machu Picchu, the lost city of the Incas, perches on its mountain ridge like a stone prayer offered to the gods of wind and cloud. But this extraordinary site is far more than an abandoned city. It is a masterwork of energy architecture, a place where ancient builders achieved a harmony between human intention and natural forces that continues to inspire. 1 to 5 centuries after its abandonment, the location itself suggests a profound understanding of earth energies. Machu Picchu sits at the confluence of multiple geological forces, the meeting of tectonic plates, the convergence of river valleys, the intersection of magnetic field lines that follow the mountain ridges. Modern energy workers who visit the site often report that their instruments react dramatically to these convergences, registering electromagnetic anomalies that conventional geology cannot fully explain. The Inca builders, who called themselves children of the sun, understood that certain places on Earth serve as natural focal points for cosmic energies. They recognized Machu Picchu as one of these special locations and shaped their construction to amplify rather than interfere with the natural energy patterns. The famous Intihuatana stone, literally the hitching post of the sun, was carved to serve as a cosmic antenna, its precisely angled surfaces designed to capture and focus both solar and stellar energies. The stonework at Machu Picchu demonstrates a level of precision that challenges modern engineering capabilities. Massive granite blocks, some weighing many tons, were fitted together so perfectly that a knife blade cannot slide between them. But this was not merely a display of technical prowess. The builders understood that precise fitting was necessary to create structures that could resonate with the Earth's subtle energies without interference from gaps or irregularities. Each building within the complex was oriented according to astronomical alignments that served both practical and spiritual purposes. The Temple of the Sun, with its curved wall following the natural contours of the underlying bedrock, was positioned to capture the first rays of sunlight during the winter solstice. But beyond its solar function, the temple served as a resonating chamber where the natural energies of the mountain were focused and amplified for ceremonial purposes. The agricultural terraces that cascade down the mountainside represent another dimension of the site's energy architecture. These terraces were not merely practical farming solutions, but carefully designed to work with the mountain's natural energy flows. The Inca understood that food grown in harmony with earth energies would possess greater vitality and nutritional value. The terraces also served to stabilize the mountain's energy patterns, preventing erosion not just of soil, but of the subtle forces that made the site sacred. Water played a crucial role in Machu Picchu's energy design. The complex system of fountains, channels, and pools was engineered to direct water flow in patterns that enhanced the site's natural energy circulation. Water, with its capacity to hold memory and conduct subtle energies, served as both a practical necessity and a spiritual tool. The sound of flowing water throughout the complex created a natural soundscape that promoted meditative states and energetic harmony. The ritual calendar that governed life at Machu Picchu was intimately connected to astronomical cycles and energy flows. Ceremonies were timed to coincide with solstices, equinoxes, and the rising of specific star constellations. These were not merely symbolic observances, but practical applications of energy work. Moments when the cosmic alignments amplified the site's natural power and made it possible to achieve deeper states of consciousness and healing. Modern visitors to Machu Picchu often report profound spiritual experiences that seem to occur spontaneously. Many describe a sense of expansion, as if the normal boundaries of consciousness become more permeable in this rarefied environment. Others speak of receiving insights or healing that they attribute to the site's unique energy signature. These experiences suggest that whatever the Inca builders achieved in their integration of architecture and energy, it continues to function across the centuries. The abandonment of Machu Picchu remains one of archaeology's great mysteries. Some scholars suggest it was deserted due to Spanish conquest. Others propose epidemic disease or political upheaval. But from an energetic perspective, another possibility emerges, that the site was consciously abandoned when its original purpose had been fulfilled, or when changing cosmic cycles made it less suitable for its intended function. The Inca understanding of time was cyclical rather than linear, and they may have recognized that different sites would be called into service during different epochs. In the misty landscape of Somerset, where legend and history interweave like morning fog and ancient memory, lies a place that has drawn pilgrims for over 2,000 years. Glastonbury, with its tor rising like a natural pyramid from the surrounding plains, represents one of Britain's most enduring sacred sites, a place where Celtic spirituality, Christian mysticism, and earth energy traditions have merged into something greater than any single religious expression. At the heart of Glastonbury's mystery flow to ancient wells, whose waters have been considered sacred since pre-Christian times. The Chalice Well, also known as the Red Spring, produces water rich in iron that stains everything it touches with rust-red color. The White Spring, flowing from the opposite side of the Tor, emerges crystal clear and calcium-rich together. These waters represent the ancient Celtic understanding of the divine as expressed through the marriage of opposites, red and white, iron and calcium, the blood of the earth and the milk of the mother goddess. The chemistry of these waters tells a story of deep geological processes that have been ongoing for millennia. The Red Spring emerges from iron-rich rock formations deep within the earth, while the White Spring filters through limestone caverns that leach calcium into the flow. But to the ancient peoples who first recognized these springs as sacred, the chemical explanation would have been secondary to the energetic reality. These waters carried the living essence of the earth goddess herself, flowing from her womb to bless and heal all who approached with reverence. The Chalice Well Gardens, developed around the Red Spring, have been designed as a meditation on the sacred feminine and the healing power of water. The Vasica Pisces symbol that adorns the wellhead to intersecting circles creating an almond-shaped opening represents the intersection of heaven and earth, spirit and matter, masculine and feminine energies. This ancient symbol appears in sacred architecture worldwide, from Gothic cathedral windows to Buddhist mandalas, suggesting a universal recognition of its power to represent the point where opposites meet and transformation becomes possible. Pilgrims who drink from the chalice will often report subtle but significant effects on their physical and emotional well-being. Some describe a sense of grounding and centering, as if the iron-rich water helps anchor scattered energies back into the body. Others speak of emotional healing, particularly around issues of grief and loss. The water's high iron content may play a role in these effects. Iron is essential for healthy blood formation and oxygen transport, and its deficiency can contribute to depression and fatigue. The White Spring, flowing from the underground chambers within Glastonbury Tor, has been developed as a temple space where visitors can experience the water in its natural cave environment. The chambers, lined with flowstone formations created by thousands of years of calcium deposition, create a natural cathedral where the sound of flowing water becomes a form of prayer. Here, in the belly of the sacred mountain, pilgrims can connect with the more receptive, introspective aspects of water's healing power. The tradition of water healing at Glastonbury extends back to the earliest Celtic settlements. The Druids recognized that certain springs possessed healing properties that went beyond their mineral content. They understood that water, as a conductor of subtle energies, could carry healing information from the earth directly into the human energy system. This understanding forms the basis for many modern water healing therapies. From homeopathy to flower essences, practices that work with water's capacity to hold and transmit vibrational information. The Tor itself, rising 518 feet above the surrounding landscape, serves as a natural focal point for the area's energy patterns. Its distinctive stepped appearance may be partly natural, formed by geological processes, but many researchers believe the ancient inhabitants carved additional terraces to create a three-dimensional labyrinth spiraling around the hill. Walking this spiral path was understood as a form of moving meditation, a way of harmonizing personal energy with the greater patterns of earth and sky. Archaeological evidence suggests that Glastonbury has been continuously occupied for over 5,000 years, making it one of Britain's oldest sustained sacred sites. Each generation of inhabitants, Celtic, Roman, Saxon, and medieval Christian, added their own layers of understanding to the site's evolving spiritual identity. The famous Glastonbury Abbey, built over earlier pagan temples, represents this layering of traditions rather than their replacement. The Christian monks who established the abbey recognized that they were building on foundations that were already sacred, and they incorporated rather than destroyed the earlier understanding of the land's spiritual power. Modern research into the geological structure of Glastonbury has revealed some intriguing anomalies that may explain the site's long history as a place of spiritual significance. The Tor sits at the intersection of several underground watercourses, creating a natural hydraulic system that may generate subtle electromagnetic effects. Some researchers have detected unusual magnetic field variations in the area, patterns that correlate with the traditional descriptions of energy flows around sacred sites. The water from both springs continues to flow year-round, regardless of weather conditions, consistency that the ancient inhabitants would have seen as evidence of the spring's divine nature. This reliable flow made Glastonbury an oasis of life in a sometimes harsh landscape, but more than that, it provided a constant reminder of the earth's generous, nurturing aspect. In drinking from these wells, pilgrims participate in a communion that connects them not only to the living earth, but to the countless generations who have found healing and inspiration in these sacred waters. The silence pressed against the temple walls like accumulated centuries, each stone holding whispers of the countless souls who had once walked these sacred corridors. Here, in the pre-dawn darkness of Angkor Wat, the ancient Khmer understanding of cosmic harmony still pulsed beneath layers of moss and time. The temple complex stretched across the Cambodian landscape like a stone mandala, its towers reaching toward the heavens in perfect mathematical precision, each angle calculated to mirror the constellation Draco as it appeared in the sky over 1,000 years ago. The builders of Angkor had understood something profound about the relationship between earthly structures and celestial movements. They carved their devotion into sandstone and laterite, creating not merely buildings, but instruments of cosmic connection. The temple's orientation to the spring equinox sunrise was no accident. It was a deliberate alignment with the eternal dance of light and shadow that governed the agricultural cycles upon which their civilization depended. As the first rays of dawn crept across the reflecting pools, they illuminated bas-reliefs depicting the churning of the ocean of milk. The Hindu creation myth, carved in stone with such intricate detail that each wave seemed to move in the flickering morning light. The French explorer Henry Moai, who brought Angkor to Western attention in 1860, wrote of feeling an inexplicable sense of reverence as he first glimpsed the temple towers emerging from the jungle canopy. He described a sensation of standing before something that transcended mere architecture, as if the stones themselves held memory. Local Khmer guides had always known this feeling, passing down through generations the understanding that certain places held invisible currents of power, pathways of energy that connected the earthbound to the divine. This sensation of sacred presence was not unique to Angkor. Across the Pacific, on a remote island in Polynesia, Easter Island's Moai statues stood sentinel against the endless ocean, their backs turned to the sea as they gazed eternally inland. The Rapa Nui people who carved these nearly 1,000 stone giants understood the concept of mana, the spiritual energy that flowed through all things, concentrated in certain places and objects. The Moai were not mere statues, but vessels, each one carved with specific intention to channel and focus this vital force. The island itself sat upon one of the most isolated points on Earth, thousands of miles from the nearest inhabited land. Yet its position was not accidental in the cosmic geography of the Pacific. Polynesian navigators, masters of reading wind patterns, star positions, and ocean swells, recognized Easter Island as a significant node in the vast network of energy, lines that crisscrossed the Pacific Ocean. They called these invisible pathways Te Lapa, the underwater lightning, referring to the phosphorescent trails that sometimes appeared in the wake of their voyaging canoes. The Moai themselves were carved from volcanic tuff, quarried at Rano Raku, a crater whose slopes still hold nearly 400, partially buried, statues in various stages of completion. Each figure was unique, bearing distinct facial features that suggested they were portraits of specific ancestors or chiefs. The Rapa Nui believed that the statues walked to their final positions around the island's perimeter, guided by the mana of their creators. Modern archaeology has revealed sophisticated engineering techniques that could indeed have moved the massive figures in an upright walking position, lending credence to the oral traditions that described the Moai as walking to their destinies. Halfway around the world, in the rolling hills of southern England, another ancient mystery carved itself into the landscape with deliberate precision. The Avebury stone circle, larger and older than Stonehenge, encompassed an entire village within its massive circumference. The great circle consisted of 3 stone rings, the outer one containing some of the largest megalithic stones in Britain. Each sarsen stone had been carefully positioned not merely for aesthetic effect, but to create a complex pattern of energy flow that ancient peoples could sense and utilize. Leading south from Avebury, the Neolithic builders constructed what archaeologists now call the West Kennet Avenue, processional pathway marked by pairs of standing stones that extended for over a mile across the Wiltshire countryside. The avenue connected Avebury to a smaller stone circle at a site called the Sanctuary, creating a linear, sacred landscape that channeled both human ritual activity and something more intangible, the earth energies that dowsers and sensitives claimed to detect flowing along the route. But perhaps most intriguing of all was the enormous earthwork that undulated across the downs like a frozen river of chalk and earth. The Avebury serpent, as some called it, could only be fully appreciated from above. From ground level, it appeared as a series of parallel ditches and banks, an ancient boundary or fortification whose purpose remained unclear. Yet when viewed from the air, the earthwork revealed its true nature, a massive serpentine form that seemed to writhe across the landscape, its head at Avebury and its tail extending toward the sacred hill of Silbury. Silbury Hill itself defied easy explanation. Rising 160 feet above the surrounding plain, it was the largest artificial mound in Europe, constructed around 2470 BCE from chalk and earth carried by countless hands over generations. No burial chamber had ever been found within its carefully engineered interior, despite numerous archaeological investigations. The hill's purpose remained as mysterious as its construction was impressive, though some researchers suggested it might have served as a massive observatory. Its flattened summit, providing a platform for tracking celestial movements across the night sky. The ancient Britons who created this sacred landscape understood something about the natural flows of energy that modern science was only beginning to rediscover. They positioned their monuments at points where underground water sources, mineral deposits, and geological fault lines intersected, creating what geomancers called earth currents. These invisible streams of terrestrial energy could be detected by sensitive individuals using simple tools, hazel twigs, pendulums, or merely their own heightened awareness of subtle environmental changes. Archaeological evidence suggested that many of Britain's stone circles and ancient sacred sites were positioned along these energy lines, creating a vast network of connected power points that spanned the entire British Isles. The Romans, with their practical approach to conquest and administration, recognized the spiritual significance these places held for the Celtic tribes they encountered. Rather than destroying the ancient sites, they often incorporated them into their own religious practices, building temples to their gods on foundations laid by Bronze Age builders. This pattern of continuous sacred use repeated itself throughout Europe and beyond. In Greece, the oracle at Delphi occupied a site where sweet-smelling vapors emerged from cracks in the earth, inducing the prophetic trances that made the Pythia famous throughout the ancient world. Modern geology has identified these vapors as ethylene gas seeping from geological faults deep beneath the temple. Yet the Greeks understood that the site's power transcended mere geological phenomena. They recognized Delphi as the umbellus, the navel of the world, the point from which divine wisdom emanated to guide human affairs. Similarly, the great temples of Egypt were positioned with astronomical precision at sites where the life-giving Nile River created natural energy vortexes. The Temple of Karnak, constructed and expanded over more than 2 millennia, aligned with the winter solstice, sunrise, and incorporated sacred geometry that mirrored the positions of key stars in the constellation Orion. The ancient Egyptians associated Orion with Osiris, god of the underworld and rebirth, and believed that pharaohs' souls journeyed to this stellar destination after death. The pyramid complexes at Giza represented the culmination of this astronomical architecture. The three main pyramids aligned with Orion's belt with remarkable precision, while the entire complex was oriented to cardinal directions with an accuracy that impressed modern surveyors. But beyond their astronomical alignments, the pyramids demonstrated sophisticated understanding of acoustic properties, electromagnetic fields, and geological resonance that modern science struggled to fully explain. Inside the Great Pyramid, the king's chamber was constructed with such precise dimensions that it naturally resonated at a frequency of W111 Hz when struck or when human voices reached specific tones. Research suggested that this frequency could induce altered states of consciousness, promoting the release of endorphins and creating the sense of spiritual transcendence that ancient practitioners sought in their sacred rituals. The chambers. Granite walls contained high percentages of quartz crystal, which could piezoelectric effects under pressure, potentially generating subtle electromagnetic fields that sensitive individuals might perceive as spiritual energy. High in the Peruvian Andes, the ancient Inca city of Machu Picchu clung to its mountain ridge like a crown of worked stone, its precisely fitted blocks following the natural contours of the sacred peak. The city's Quechua name meant Old Peak, though the Inca themselves called it Patalacta, place of the hummingbird. The site was positioned at the confluence of powerful energy lines that the Inca called Sikhs, invisible pathways that connected sacred places across their vast empire. The Inca worldview recognized the landscape itself as alive, possessed of consciousness and spiritual power. Mountains were apis, mountain spirits that governed local weather patterns and protected the communities nestled in their valleys. Machu Picchu occupied one of the most powerful apu sites in the Inca realm. Perched between the peaks of Huayna Picchu and Machu Picchu Mountain, at an elevation where condors soared and clouds gathered with mysterious regularity, the city's builders understood the subtle relationship between altitude, atmospheric pressure, and human consciousness. At nearly 8,000 feet above sea level, the thin mountain air created natural conditions that could induce mild euphoria and heighten spiritual awareness. The Inca deliberately constructed their most sacred sites at these elevations, believing that the proximity to the sky realm of the Condor facilitated communication with celestial deities within Machu Picchu. The Intihuatana stone served as the spiritual focal point of the entire complex. This carved granite outcrop, whose name meant hitching post of the sun, was precisely oriented to track the sun's movement throughout the year. At the winter and summer solstices, the stone cast no shadow when the sun reached its zenith, demonstrating the astronomical sophistication that guided Inca architecture and urban planning. But the Intihuatana was more than a solar cap, was believed to generate and focus spiritual energy that could be sensed by those trained in ancient practices. Spanish conquistadors systematically destroyed similar stones throughout the Inca Empire, recognizing them as focal points of indigenous Spiritual power. The Intihuatana at Machu Picchu survived only because the city remained hidden from European eyes until 1911, when American archaeologist Hiram Bingham brought it to international attention. The preservation of Machu Picchu allowed researchers to study intact examples of Inca stoneworking techniques that had been lost for centuries. The precision with which massive granite blocks were fitted together without mortar remained a source of wonder and speculation. Some stones showed evidence of having been softened or molded, as if the granite had been temporarily rendered plastic through unknown methods. Local legends spoke of plant extracts that could soften stone, though no such techniques had been documented by early Spanish chroniclers. Modern analysis revealed that the stones were cut and fitted with tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters, creating joints so tight that not even a knife blade could be inserted between them. This precision served practical purposes in an earthquake-prone region, allowing the structures to flex and move as a unit during seismic events. But the technique also created a more subtle effect: the elimination of air gaps between stones may have enhanced the structure's ability to conduct and focus terrestrial energies in ways that the Inca understood, but that modern science had yet to fully investigate. Similar precision stonework appeared at other Inca sites throughout the Andes, suggesting a sophisticated understanding of architectural techniques that went beyond mere engineering. At Sacsayhuaman, the fortress overlooking Cusco, limestone blocks weighing hundreds of tons were fitted together in complex interlocking patterns that resembled massive three-dimensional puzzles. The construction required not only technical skill but intimate knowledge of the stone's internal structure and natural fracture patterns. The Inca believed that stones themselves possessed consciousness and could be communicated with by those who understood proper protocols. Master builders, called Kalanas, underwent extensive training not only in technical skills but in the spiritual practices that allowed them to work in harmony with the materials they shaped. They performed rituals of request and gratitude, making offerings to the stone spirits before beginning work and thanking them for their cooperation once construction was complete. This animistic understanding of materials extended throughout Inca culture. Textiles woven from vicuna wool and adorned with geometric patterns were believed to hold protective power. Gold and silver were considered the sweat and tears of the sun and moon, respectively, too sacred for mere decoration, but appropriate for ritual objects that facilitated communication with celestial deities. The metalwork found in Inca temples demonstrated not only technical mastery but deep understanding of the spiritual properties attributed to different materials. The sudden collapse of the Inca Empire following Spanish conquest meant that much of this traditional knowledge disappeared within a single generation. The systematic destruction of sacred sites, the melting down of ritual objects for their precious metal content, and the forced conversion of indigenous populations to Christianity created a cultural rupture from which many traditions never recovered. Yet, in remote Andean communities, fragments of the old knowledge persisted, passed down through family lines and preserved in the ancient Quechua language that continued to be spoken. Despite centuries of suppression, modern researchers working with indigenous elders in Peru and Bolivia have begun to document some of these surviving traditions. They describe sensing the presence of earth energies at specific locations, using traditional techniques to identify underground water sources, and performing ceremonies designed to maintain harmony between human communities and the natural forces that surrounded them. These practices suggested that the ancient understanding of earth energies was not merely metaphorical, but based on observable phenomena that could be detected and utilized by those trained in appropriate methods. The persistence of these traditions, despite centuries of suppression, pointed to their practical effectiveness and deep cultural significance. They represented not primitive superstitions, but sophisticated systems of environmental awareness that had sustained Andean civilizations for millennia. The challenge for modern researchers lay in translating these indigenous knowledge systems into frameworks that could be understood and verified using contemporary scientific methods. Recent studies using ground-penetrating radar, magnetometer surveys, and seismic monitoring equipment had begun to detect measurable variations in electromagnetic and gravitational fields at ancient sacred sites. These variations correlated surprisingly well with locations identified by traditional dowsers and indigenous practitioners as power spots or energy nodes. The convergence of ancient wisdom and modern technology suggested that the earth energy concept might have measurable physical correlates that previous generations of scientists had lacked the tools to detect. As understanding of these phenomena deepened, researchers began to appreciate the sophistication of ancient sacred architecture in ways that purely archaeological approaches had missed. The careful positioning of monuments, the precise orientation of structures, and the selection of specific materials all appeared to be guided by principles that modern civilization was only beginning to rediscover. The ancient builders had created not merely impressive monuments, but sophisticated instruments for detecting, focusing, and utilizing natural energies that remained largely invisible to contemporary science. This realization prompted a fundamental shift in how sacred sites were studied and understood. Rather than viewing them simply as religious monuments or archaeological curiosities, researchers began to approach them as potential repositories of lost knowledge about the subtle interactions between human consciousness, natural environment, and cosmic forces. The implications extended far beyond academic archaeology, suggesting practical applications for everything from architecture and urban planning to health and environmental management. The ancient understanding of earth energies also offered new perspectives on sustainable living and environmental harmony. Traditional cultures that recognized the landscape as alive and conscious developed practices that maintained ecological balance over centuries or millennia. Their sacred sites served not only as places of worship, but as monitoring stations where environmental changes could be detected and appropriate responses implemented through ritual and practical action on an age of climate change and environmental crisis. These traditional approaches to landscape consciousness offered valuable insights for developing more sustainable relationships with the natural world. They suggested that human settlements and activities could be designed to work in harmony with natural energy flows, rather than disrupting them, creating built environments that enhanced rather than depleted the life force of their surroundings. The sacred sites themselves continued to serve as teachers, their stone lessons waiting patiently for humanity to develop the sensitivity and wisdom necessary to understand their deeper messages. Each monument represented not just the achievement of its builders, but an invitation to future generations to remember their connection to the living earth and the cosmic forces that shaped all existence. In the quiet moments before dawn, when the first light touched ancient stones and awakened the memories sleeping within them, these sites still offered their timeless teachings to any who approached with open hearts and receptive minds. The stories held within megalithic circles, temple complexes, and sacred mountains spoke of humanity's eternal quest to understand its place in the cosmic order. They revealed civilizations that had achieved remarkable harmony between spiritual understanding and technical accomplishment, creating monuments that served simultaneously as works of art, scientific instruments, and gateways to transcendent experience. These achievements suggested possibilities for human culture that modern civilization had yet to fully explore or recover. As the night deepened around these ancient sites, the stones continued their patient vigil, holding their secrets close while remaining forever open to those who approached with genuine reverence and desire to learn. The earth energies they focused and amplified flowed on as they had for millennia, unchanged by the rise and fall of empires, waiting for humanity to remember the wisdom that had once guided the construction of these magnificent monuments too. The eternal dialogue between earth and sky, matter and spirit, human aspiration and cosmic reality. The threads that connected these sacred places stretched across continents like invisible veins of light, carrying whispers of ancient understanding. Through the bedrock of the world, in the high Andes, where oxygen grew thin and the sky pressed close to earth, the ceremonial platforms of Sacsayhuaman held secrets that transcended the architectural mastery of their perfectly fitted stones. Here, where the Inca had built upon foundations laid by peoples whose names were lost to time, the energy rose from deep within the mountain's heart. The massive stones, some weighing over 300 tons, had been arranged not merely for defense or ceremony, but as conduits for forces that flowed beneath the surface of perception. Each block fit against its neighbor with precision that defied explanation, creating joints so tight that not even a blade of grass could grow between them. The modern world measured these achievements in terms of engineering prowess, marveling at the logistics of moving such massive stones across impossible terrain. But the ancient builders had understood something more fundamental, that certain configurations of stone and earth could channel the planet's deepest energies, creating spaces where the ordinary boundaries between worlds grew thin. Standing on these platforms at dawn, when the first light touched the peaks of Picchu in the distance, visitors often reported experiences that stayed with them long after they descended to the valley below. Some spoke of feeling the ground pulse, beneath their feet, as if the earth itself possessed a heartbeat. Others described moments of profound clarity, as if the thin air had stripped away not just oxygen but the usual barriers between conscious thought and deeper understanding. The ceremonial calendar that governed life in these mountains had been built around such moments of heightened awareness. The festival of Inti Raymi, honoring the sun god, took place when the energy of the solstice aligned with the natural power of the sacred sites. During these celebrations, the boundaries between the physical and spiritual worlds were understood to dissolve entirely, allowing communication with the ancestors who dwelt in the realm beyond ordinary sight. From the heights of Peru, the invisible web of connection stretched northward to places where different cultures had recognized the same fundamental truths about the Earth's hidden nature. In the American Southwest, the ancient Anasazi had built their cliff dwellings not merely for protection from enemies or weather, but in locations where the planetary energies converged with particular intensity. Mesa Verde, with its elaborate apartment complexes carved into the rock face, represented more than architectural innovation. The builders had chosen their sites based on subtle environmental factors that modern archaeology was only beginning to understand. The orientation of the buildings, the placement of Kiva's circular ceremonial chambers, dug deep into the earth, and the alignment of doorways and windows, all followed patterns that seemed to respond to unseen influences. The Kivas themselves were perhaps the most revealing aspect of this ancient understanding. These circular chambers, accessed by ladders from openings in their roofs, were built according to strict ceremonial specifications. Each contained a small hole in the floor called a cyper pew, representing the place from which humans had emerged into this world. But the Kivas served a deeper purpose than symbolic representation. They were designed as spaces where the Earth's energies could be concentrated and channeled for healing, divination, and communication with the spirit world. Archaeological investigations had revealed that many Kivas were built at points where underground water sources converged, creating conditions that enhanced the natural electromagnetic properties of the location. The circular construction, with its careful attention to proportions and materials, seemed designed to amplify these subtle influences until they became tangible forces that could be worked with and directed. The Anasazi understanding of these energetic properties was encoded in their creation stories, which spoke of different worlds layered one above the other, connected by passages that allowed travel between realms of existence. The emergence from the third world to the fourth our current reality was described not as a physical journey but as a shift in consciousness, a movement from one level of awareness to another. This conception of layered realities found expression in the architecture itself. The great houses of Chaco Canyon, connected by perfectly straight roads that stretched for hundreds of miles across seemingly empty desert, were positioned according to astronomical alignments that tracked celestial cycles spanning decades. But they also followed patterns in the landscape that suggested an awareness of underground features invisible to casual observation. Modern geophysical surveys had revealed that many of these ancient roads followed geological formations, watercourses, mineral veins, and fault lines that created channels for electromagnetic energy to flow through the earth. The Anasazi had apparently been able to perceive these hidden features and had built their transportation network to take advantage of the natural energy highways that crisscrossed the landscape. The sudden abandonment of these elaborate settlements in the 13th century remained one of archaeology's great mysteries. Climate change, warfare, and resource depletion had all been proposed as explanations, but the completeness of the departure suggested something more profound. Entire communities had vanished, leaving behind perfectly preserved buildings and artifacts, but taking with them the knowledge that had made their civilization possible. Some of the Pueblo peoples who claimed descent from these ancient builders spoke of the abandonment not as a failure, but as a conscious choice, recognition that the time had come to move to a different level of existence. According to these oral traditions, the Anasazi had not died out, but had learnt to live in harmony with the Earth's energies so completely that they had transcended the need for physical form entirely. The theme of transcendence through harmony with natural forces appeared again and again in the sacred traditions of cultures, separated by vast distances and centuries of time. In the remote monasteries of Tibet, where Buddhist practitioners had spent over a millennium refining techniques for working with subtle energies, similar understandings had developed independently of the American traditions. The Gompa of Rongbuk, situated at over 16,000 feet elevation beneath the north face of Mount Everest, had been built in a location where the combination of altitude, geographical features, and astronomical alignments created conditions particularly conducive to advanced spiritual practice. The thin air and extreme isolation were not obstacles to be overcome, but allies in the work of expanding consciousness beyond its usual boundaries. The founder of Rongbuk Monastery, Zatrul Rinpoche, had chosen the site in the early 20th century not for its strategic advantages, but because of visions that had revealed to him the special properties of the location. He had seen the mountain not merely as a physical peak, but as a mandala, three-dimensional representation of cosmic principles made manifest in stone and ice. The monks who lived at Rongbuk practiced techniques passed down through generations of masters' methods for working with what they called lung, the winds or energies that flowed through both the human body and the landscape itself. These practices involve not only meditation and visualization, but precise breathing techniques and physical exercises designed to harmonize the practitioner's personal energy with the larger forces moving through the environment. Advanced practitioners spoke of being able to perceive the flow of these energies directly, describing streams of light that moved through the mountain peaks and valleys according to predictable patterns related to the cycles of moon and sun. During certain seasons and times of day, these energy streams were said to intensify, creating windows of opportunity for particularly profound spiritual experiences. The location of Rongbuk at the base of Everest was significant in this context, because the mountain itself was understood to function as a massive antenna, focusing and amplifying the subtle energies that flowed through the Earth's crust. The pyramid shape of the peak, with its precisely oriented faces and dramatic vertical relief, created natural conditions similar to those produced artificially by the builders of ancient megalithic sites. Western mountaineers who visited Rongbuk often reported unusual experiences that seemed to validate these traditional understandings. Many described moments of expanded awareness while acclimatizing at the monastery, periods when ordinary consciousness gave way to states of profound clarity and connection with their sustenance. Some reported visions of the mountain as a living entity, pulsing with intelligence and purpose that transcended anything they had previously imagined possible. The monks attributed these experiences to the natural properties of the location, enhanced by centuries of focused spiritual practice that had gradually awakened the dormant potentials of the site. They spoke of the monastery itself as having developed a kind of consciousness through decades of meditation and ceremony, becoming a focal point for energies that extended far beyond the physical boundaries of the buildings. The concept of locations developing consciousness through sustained spiritual practice found its most dramatic expression in the sacred sites of ancient Egypt, where thousands of years of continuous ceremonial activity had created conditions that seemed to transcend the normal limitations of time and space. The great temple complexes along the Nile had been designed not as static monuments, but as dynamic systems for working with the fundamental forces that shaped reality itself. At Dendera, the Temple of Hathor stood as a testament to this understanding, its walls covered with astronomical charts and sacred formulas that encoded precise instructions for aligning human consciousness with cosmic cycles. The famous zodiac ceiling, with its intricate depictions of star patterns and seasonal transitions, was not merely decorative but functional, a three-dimensional map of the energy flows that connected earthly and celestial realms. The temple's construction had followed principles that took into account not only astronomical alignments, but the subtle properties of the location itself. Built at a point where the Nile's flow created specific electromagnetic conditions, the complex had been oriented to channel these natural forces through its chambers and corridors, creating spaces where ordinary perception could be transcended through carefully designed ceremonial practices. The goddess Hathor, to whom the temple was dedicated, was understood not as a separate deity, but as a personification of the creative forces that flowed through the earth itself. Her association with music, dance, and sacred sexuality reflected an understanding that these activities could attune human consciousness to the deeper rhythms of planetary and cosmic energy cycles. The priests and priestesses who served at Dendera underwent years of training in techniques for perceiving and working with these subtle forces. Their practices included not only traditional rituals, but sophisticated methods of breath control, movement, and sound production designed to create resonance between their personal energy fields and the larger forces focused by the temple's architecture. Visitors to the temple often reported experiences that seemed to confirm the effectiveness of these ancient techniques. Modern researchers, using sensitive electromagnetic equipment, had detected unusual energy signatures within the temple chambers, patterns that seemed to intensify during certain astronomical alignments predicted by the ancient calendar systems encoded in the walls. The fact that these phenomena continued to manifest thousands of years after the original builders had vanished suggested that the temple had been designed to function independently of human intervention, drawing its power from natural sources that remained as active in the present as they had been in ancient times. The building itself had become a kind of machine for focusing and amplifying the Earth's subtle energies, creating conditions where consciousness could expand beyond its usual boundaries. Similar principles had guided the construction of the Great Pyramid complex at Giza, where the precise positioning and proportions of the monuments created a system for working with forces that operated on both local and planetary scales. The relationship between the three main pyramids, their internal chambers, and the various smaller structures that surrounded them formed a unified design whose purpose transcended anything that could be explained in terms of burial customs or royal monuments. The thread that connected all these ancient sites was their recognition that consciousness and environment existed in a state of dynamic interaction, each influencing the other in ways that could be understood and deliberately enhanced. The builders of megalithic monuments, cliff dwellings, mountain temples, and pyramid complexes had all discovered methods for creating architectural environments that supported expanded states of awareness. These discoveries had not been the result of primitive superstition, but of sophisticated investigation into the nature of reality itself. The ancient practitioners had developed techniques for perceiving subtle aspects of their environment that modern science was only beginning to acknowledge, and they had used this knowledge to create spaces where the usual boundaries between observer and observed, between individual consciousness and universal intelligence, could be temporarily dissolved. The fact that these sites continued to affect visitors thousands of years after their construction suggested that the ancient builders had succeeded in creating something more permanent than mere buildings or monuments. They had discovered how to encode their understanding into stone and earth in such a way that the knowledge itself became part of the landscape, available to anyone who approached with the proper preparation and attitude. Modern visitors to these places often struggled to articulate what they experienced there, finding that ordinary language was inadequate to describe states of consciousness that transcended normal categories of thought and perception. Many reported feeling a sense of coming home, as if they were remembering something they had always known but temporarily forgotten. Others described encounters with intelligence that seemed to emanate from the stones themselves, as if the monuments had developed awareness through centuries of interaction with human consciousness. These experiences were not the products of imagination or wishful thinking, but reflected genuine interactions with environmental factors that operated below the threshold of ordinary perception. The ancient builders had understood how to create architectural forms that could focus and amplify these subtle influences. making them accessible to human awareness through carefully designed ceremonial practices. The knowledge encoded in these sacred sites represented humanity's earliest systematic investigation into the relationship between consciousness and environment, a field of study that was being rediscovered by contemporary researchers working at the intersection of physics, psychology, and consciousness studies. The ancient practitioners had anticipated by millennia discoveries about the nature of reality that modern science was only beginning to validate as the sun set behind the ancient monuments, casting long shadows across the landscapes where human beings had first learned to work with the Earth's hidden energies. The continuity between past and present became palpable. The same forces that had guided the construction of stone circles and pyramid complexes continued to flow through the earth, waiting to be recognized and worked with by anyone willing to approach them with the reverence and understanding they deserved. The knowledge was still there, encoded in stone and earth, in the alignment of monuments and the proportions of sacred chambers. It waited patiently for a generation that could once again recognize the profound intelligence that had guided humanity's first attempts to understand the deeper nature of reality. The sacred sites stood as permanent reminders that consciousness and cosmos were not separate realms, but aspects of a single, unified system that could be explored and understood through direct experience. That in the growing twilight, as the ancient stones began to glow with the accumulated energy of countless sunsets, the eternal dialogue between human awareness and planetary intelligence continued, as patient and persistent as the forces that had shaped the monuments themselves. The conversation that had begun in prehistory was far from over, waiting only for voices willing to listen and hearts ready to remember what had never truly been forgotten. The sacred sites had always been more than monuments or temples. They were invitations to remember humanity's deepest heritage, doorways to states of consciousness that connected individual awareness with the vast intelligence that moved through all things. As night settled over the ancient landscapes, the invitation remained as open as it had ever been, waiting for the next generation of seekers to accept its challenge and discover for themselves the profound truths that lay hidden within the Earth's most sacred places. The stars that had guided the ancient builders in their work began to appear in the darkening sky. The same constellations that had inspired the creation of the monuments, now bearing witness to their enduring power. In their light, the boundary between ancient and modern dissolved, revealing the timeless nature of the wisdom that the sacred sites had been built to preserve and transmit. The meridians of Earth's ancient power had always been waiting, patient as stone, eternal as stars, in the deepest chambers of forgotten temples, where silence held court with shadows. The energies that once flowed through megalithic corridors now pulsed with a rhythm older than human memory. The sacred sites, scattered across continents, were not isolated monuments to vanished civilizations, but nodes in a vast network of consciousness that had never truly ceased its whispered conversations with the cosmos. In the pre-dawn hours, when the veil between worlds grew thin as morning mist, The ancient knowledge stirred. The druids who once walked the stone circles of Britain, the priests who tended the fires of Vesta, the shamans who communed with spirits at sacred springs all had understood what modern minds struggled to grasp. The earth itself was alive, breathing through ley lines and sacred geometry, its heartbeat resonating through standing stones and temple foundations, through the careful placement of monuments that marked not just physical locations, but intersections of invisible forces that governed the dance. Between heaven and earth, the megalithic builders of prehistory had possessed an intuitive understanding of these energies that went beyond mere architectural achievement. They were geomancers, reading the subtle signatures of the land as easily as scribes read scrolls. Each stone circle, each doman, each sacred grove was positioned with mathematical precision that spoke of knowledge passed down through generations, of careful observation and spiritual communion. The monuments they left behind were not simply tombs or temples, but instruments designed to harmonize with the Earth's natural frequencies, to channel and amplify the subtle energies that flowed through the planet's meridians like blood through veins. The stones remember what we have forgotten. In their silence, they hold the echoes of ancient songs that once called down the stars and summoned the rain. They are the keepers of a knowledge that transcends words, rooted in the deep wisdom of the earth itself. As centuries passed and civilizations rose and fell like waves upon the shore, the sacred sites endured. The Romans built their temples on older foundations, recognizing the power that resided in certain places. The early Christians placed their churches over pagan shrines, not to suppress the old ways entirely, but to redirect the spiritual energy that had always flowed through these locations. The sacred geography of the ancient world was not erased, but transformed, its patterns persisting beneath new religious expressions like underground rivers that surface unexpectedly in distant lands. The Gothic cathedrals of medieval Europe, with their soaring spires and intricate rose windows, were built upon the same principles that guided the construction of Stone Age temples. The master builders of the Middle Ages understood that sacred architecture was not merely about creating beautiful spaces for worship, but about creating resonance chambers that could amplify prayer and facilitate communion with the divine. The careful orientation of altars, the precise proportions of nave and transept, the placement of windows to capture specific qualities of light all reflected an ancient understanding of how physical structures could serve as bridges between the earthly and the celestial in the New World. The indigenous peoples had their own sacred sites, their own understanding of the earth's power. The medicine wheels of the plains tribes, the kivas of the Pueblo peoples, the ceremonial centers of the Maya and Aztecs reflected a deep knowledge of how to work with the natural energies of the land. These sites were not built to dominate the landscape, but to harmonize with it, to become part of the natural flow of energy that connected all living things. The Native American concept of the earth as a living being, deserving of respect and careful stewardship, reflected an understanding that the ancient megalith builders would have recognized and honored. The standing stones spoke in frequencies. Below the threshold of human hearing, their voices joining in a planetary chorus that had been singing since the first dawn. Each megalith was a note in a vast composition, its tone determined by the type of stone, its height, its position relative to other stones, and to the invisible lines of force that crisscrossed the earth. The ancient builders had been composers, as much as architects, creating symphonies in stone that would play for millennia, their melodies shifting with the seasons and the slow procession of the stars. Modern research had begun to confirm what the ancients had always known, that certain types of stone, particularly granite and other crystalline rocks, possessed piezoelectric properties that allowed them to generate electrical charges when subjected to pressure. The massive stones of ancient monuments, bearing the weight of centuries and the constant pressure of gravitational forces, were in a state of continuous electrical activity. This subtle energy field, normally invisible to human perception, could be detected by sensitive individuals and might explain the sense of otherworldly presence that many visitors to sacred sites reported experiencing. The placement of these stones was never random. Archaeological studies had revealed that many stone circles and alignments were positioned along underground water sources, geological fault lines, and areas of unusual magnetic activity. The ancients had been natural dowsers, able to sense the subtle variations in the Earth's magnetic field that indicated the presence of underground streams or mineral deposits. They understood that water, particularly moving water, carried electrical charges that could interact with the piezoelectric properties of certain stones, creating zones of heightened energy that could be felt by those who knew how to listen, with their bodies rather than their minds. The spiral patterns carved into megalithic stones throughout Europe were not mere decorations, but maps of energy flow. These petroglyphs traced the path of invisible currents, showing how energy moved through the landscape in patterns that resembled the flow of water, the movement of wind, or the spiral arms of galaxies. The ancient carvers had somehow perceived these patterns and recorded them in stone, creating a visual language that could guide future generations in understanding the subtle forces that shaped both the physical and spiritual dimensions of existence. In Ireland, the passage tomb at Newgrange had been built to capture the light of the winter solstice, but its purpose went beyond mere solar observation. The narrow passage that led to the central chamber was oriented with such precision that only on the shortest day of the year could sunlight penetrate to the very heart of the monument. As the golden beam traveled down the ancient corridor, it illuminated not just the triple spiral carved into the back stone of the chamber, but activated the entire structure, transforming it into a massive resonance chamber that amplified the spiritual energy of the solstice moment. The builders of Newgrange had understood that certain times of year, when the Earth's relationship to the Sun reached specific geometric configurations, the planet's energy field underwent subtle but significant changes. The solstices and equinoxes were not merely astronomical events, but moments of planetary alignment that could be utilized for spiritual purposes. The passage tomb served as a cosmic instrument, designed to capture and concentrate these moments of heightened energy, allowing the ancient priests and priestesses to commune with forces that were normally beyond human perception. In the marriage of stone and starlight, the ancients found a language that transcended words. Each megalith was a letter in an alphabet of power, each stone circle a sentence in the great book of the earth's wisdom. The knowledge of how to read this stone language had been passed down through generations of initiates, preserved in oral traditions that were as carefully guarded as any written scripture. The Druids of Britain, the priests of ancient Egypt, the shamans of Siberia had possessed techniques for interpreting the subtle messages encoded in sacred landscapes. They understood that the earth itself was a vast library, its knowledge, written not in books but in the arrangement of stones, the flow of water, the patterns of wind and weather. This tradition of geomancy had survived in various forms throughout the centuries. The Chinese art of Feng Shui, the Hindu practice of Vastu Shastra, the medieval European science of natural magical were remnants of the ancient understanding of how to work with the subtle energies of place. Even in the modern world, when most people had forgotten how to perceive these subtle forces, the knowledge persisted in the practices of dowsers, in the traditions of indigenous peoples, and in the growing scientific study of geopathology and the biological effects of geological phenomena across the vast expanses of the earth. The sacred sites formed a network of unimaginable complexity and beauty, like neurons in a planetary brain. The ancient temples and stone circles were connected by invisible pathways of energy that pulsed with information, carrying messages between distant points in a language that predated human speech. The ley lines that connected Stonehenge to Glastonbury, that linked the Great Pyramid of Giza to the stone circles of the Sahara, that joined the ceremonial centers of the Americas in a continental web of power. These were not mere coincidences of alignment, but the infrastructure of a planetary consciousness that had been recognized and honored by the ancient world. The Celtic Druids had understood this network intimately. Their sacred groves and stone circles were not isolated centers of worship, but nodes in a vast communication system that allowed them to share knowledge and coordinate rituals across hundreds of miles. When the Druids of Anglesey performed their seasonal ceremonies, the energy they raised was felt by their brethren in Gaul, in Ireland, in the distant highlands of Scotland. The network of sacred sites functioned as a kind of spiritual internet, allowing the transmission of information at speeds that seemed to transcend the normal limitations of space and time. This understanding had been crucial to the survival of ancient peoples. The ability to sense changes in the Earth's energy field often provided advance warning of natural disasters, shifts in weather patterns, or the approach of threats from neighboring tribes. The shamans and priests who tended the sacred sites were not merely religious figures, but early warning systems for their communities, using their sensitivity to subtle energies to detect disturbances that might herald danger or opportunity. The Romans, with their practical approach to conquest and administration, had recognized the importance of these sacred networks. Rather than destroying the temples and shrines of conquered peoples, they often corrupted them, building their own religious structures on the same sites and incorporating local deities into their pantheon. They understood that the power of these places was not dependent on the specific religious beliefs of their builders, but on their location within the larger web of planetary energy. A temple to Mars built on the site of a Celtic shrine to Log would be just as powerful as the original structure, perhaps more so, because it could tap into the accumulated spiritual energy of centuries of worship. The medieval period had seen a conscious effort to Christianize these ancient sites, but the underlying energy patterns remained unchanged. The great cathedrals of Europe were built with the same careful attention to placement and orientation that had guided the construction of prehistoric temples. The pilgrim routes that connected these sacred sites, the Camino de Santiago, the pilgrimage to Canterbury, the journey to Rome, followed the same paths that had been used for spiritual travel since the dawn of human consciousness. The pilgrims who walked these routes were unknowingly participating in an ancient tradition of connecting with the planetary grid of sacred energy, in the Islamic world. The concept of the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, reflected a similar understanding of the power of sacred place. The Kaaba, the central focus of Islamic worship, was built on a site that had been considered sacred for centuries before the advent of Islam. The annual gathering of millions of pilgrims at this single point created a massive focusing of spiritual energy that could be felt around the world. The ritual circumambulation of the Kaaba, the Tawaf, created a giant spiral of human energy that mirrored the spiral patterns found in ancient megalithic art and echoed the rotational movements of planets and galaxies. The Hindu tradition of sacred geography was perhaps the most sophisticated understanding of planetary energy systems to survive into the modern era. The concept of Shakti Pithas, the sacred sites where the divine feminine energy was believed to be particularly strong, represented a mapping of the Earth's energy field that was both mythological and practical. The great temple complexes of India, with their precise astronomical alignments and complex geometric designs, were built according to principles that recognized the Earth as a living organism with its own energy anatomy. The Earth dreams in stone and sings in water. The ancient ones built their temples at the places where these dreams and songs were strongest, creating bridges between the world of matter and the realm of spirit. The Tibetan tradition of sacred. The landscape was equally sophisticated. The Buddhists of the Himalayas had developed a complex understanding of how spiritual energy moved through the landscape, creating detailed maps of power places and sacred routes that allowed practitioners to work with the natural energy of the mountains for spiritual transformation. The practice of establishing meditation retreats in caves and hermitages at specific locations was based on a precise knowledge of where the Earth's energy was most conducive to. Contemplative practice in the Americas. The Inca had understood the concept of sect-line sacred pathways that radiated out from the capital city of Cusco like the spokes of a cosmic wheel. These lines connected hundreds of walkers, sacred sites that marked important features of the landscape and served as focal points for ritual and ceremony. The entire Inca Empire was organized around this sacred geography, with political and religious power flowing along the same routes that carried the spiritual energy of the Andes. The Maya had developed, perhaps, the most sophisticated astronomical understanding of any ancient civilization, and their temple complexes reflected a deep knowledge of how celestial cycles influence the flow of earth energy. The Great Pyramid of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza was designed to create a shadow serpent that would descend the northern staircase during the spring and autumn equinoxes, demonstrating the builder's ability to predict and utilize specific moments of planetary alignment for spiritual purposes. In the modern world, as humanity faced unprecedented challenges of environmental destruction and spiritual disconnection, the ancient wisdom of the sacred sites was beginning to stir once again. The Earth's energy field, disrupted by centuries of industrial activity and urban development, was sending out distress signals that sensitive individuals around the world were beginning to receive. The ancient sites, long dormant or reduced to tourist attractions, were beginning to awaken as humanity approached a crisis that would require all of its accumulated wisdom to navigate successfully. The phenomenon of crop circles, mysterious, geometric patterns that appeared overnight in fields of grain, was perhaps the most visible sign of this awakening. While skeptics dismissed them as elaborate hoaxes, researchers who studied the patterns found evidence of energy effects that could not be easily explained. The plants within genuine crop circles showed cellular changes that suggested exposure to intense electromagnetic fields, and the geometric designs themselves often incorporated sophisticated mathematical principles that echoed the sacred geometry found in ancient temples and monuments. Many of these crop circles appeared in close proximity to ancient sites, particularly in the Avebury area of Wiltshire, England, where some of the most powerful prehistoric monuments were located. The patterns seemed to be responses to the energy emanating from these ancient structures, as if the earth itself was attempting to communicate through the medium of growing plants, using a visual language that recalled the petroglyphs and stone carvings of earlier civilizations. The growing interest in earth mysteries and sacred site studies was not merely academic curiosity, but reflected a deeper spiritual hunger in modern humanity. People were beginning to sense that the materialist worldview that had dominated the past few centuries was incomplete, that there were dimensions of reality that science had not yet learned to measure or understand. The ancient sites offered a window into these hidden dimensions, a connection to ways of knowing that preceded and transcended the rational, analytical mind. The practice of dowsing, the ability to sense underground water and energy fields using simple tools like pendulums or dowsing rods, was experiencing a renaissance as people rediscovered these ancient skills. Modern dowsers were mapping the energy fields of sacred sites with unprecedented precision, revealing patterns of underground water flow, geological structures, and electromagnetic anomalies that corresponded exactly with the placement of ancient monuments. The builders of these sites had clearly possessed the same sensitivities that modern dowsers were redeveloping, along with a much more sophisticated understanding of how to work with these subtle energies for spiritual purposes. The environmental movement was also beginning to recognize the importance of sacred sites in maintaining the health of the planet's energy systems. Many indigenous peoples had long understood that certain places were so sacred that they should never be disturbed, and modern ecological science was beginning to confirm that these same sites often played crucial roles in maintaining local ecosystems. The sacred groves of India, the Shinrin-yoku forests of Japan, the ceremonial sites of Native American tribes all were proving to be essential refuges for biodiversity and centers of ecological stability. The concept of Gaia, the Earth as a living organism, was gaining acceptance among scientists and spiritual seekers alike. This ancient understanding, known to indigenous peoples around the world, suggested that the planet itself was a conscious being with its own intelligence and will. The sacred sites were the acupuncture points of this planetary organism, places where the Earth's energy could be accessed and balanced for the benefit of all life. As humanity faced the consequences of its disconnection from natural systems, the wisdom of the ancient site builders was becoming increasingly relevant. The Earth is stirring from its long sleep, and the stones are beginning to sing again. In this time of crisis and transformation, the ancient wisdom is awakening, calling us back to the sacred relationship our ancestors knew. The New Age movement, despite its sometimes superficial commercialization of ancient wisdom, was serving as a bridge between the old knowledge and modern consciousness. People who had never heard of ley lines or sacred geometry were instinctively drawn to ancient sites, feeling a sense of peace and connection that they could not easily explain. The popularity of spiritual tourism, the growth of earth-based religions, and the increasing interest in ancient wisdom traditions all reflected a collective recognition that humanity needed to reconnect with the deeper intelligence of the planet. Modern physics was also beginning to provide theoretical frameworks that could explain some of the phenomena associated with sacred sites. The discovery of morphic fields, the study of consciousness and quantum entanglement, the investigation of subtle energy fields all were suggesting that the universe was far more interconnected and conscious than the mechanistic worldview had assumed. The ancient understanding of the Earth as a living, conscious being was beginning to seem less like primitive superstition and more like sophisticated wisdom. The convergence of ancient wisdom and modern science was creating new possibilities for understanding and working with the Earth's energy systems. Researchers were using sensitive electronic instruments to measure the electromagnetic fields of sacred sites, documenting the subtle variations in energy that the ancient builders had somehow been able to detect and utilize. These measurements were revealing that the sites were indeed active energy centers, with field strengths and frequencies that varied in response to solar activity, magnetic storms, and celestial alignments as the sun set over the ancient landscape. casting long shadows across the standing stones and sacred sites that had witnessed countless generations of human seeking. The eternal dance between earth and sky continued its timeless rhythm. The megalithic monuments stood as silent witnesses to this cosmic choreography, their stones aligned with the movements of celestial bodies that had guided their builders in creating these temples to the divine harmony that pervaded all existence. The relationship between the ancient sites and the cosmic cycles was not merely observational but participatory. The builders had understood that consciousness itself was a force that could influence the flow of energy through these sacred networks. The rituals performed at specific times of year, when the Earth's alignment with the sun and other celestial bodies created windows of opportunity for spiritual transformation, were designed to amplify and direct this energy for the benefit of the entire community. The megalithic calendar, encoded in the positions and orientations of the stones, was far more sophisticated than a simple marking of seasonal changes. It was a guide to the subtle rhythms of planetary energy, a map of the times when the barriers between dimensions grew thin and the ancient wisdom could be accessed more easily. The builders had recognized that consciousness and cosmos were intimately connected, that the movements of the stars and planets were reflected in the patterns of energy that flowed through the earth and through human awareness itself. This understanding had profound implications for how the ancient peoples viewed their place in the universe. They did not see themselves as separate from nature, but as conscious participants in the grand symphony of existence. The sacred sites were not merely places of worship, but interfaces between human consciousness and the larger intelligence that governed the cosmos. Through ritual and ceremony, meditation and prayer, the ancient practitioners had learned to harmonize their individual awareness with the vast rhythms of the universe. The tradition of the sacred feminine, embodied in the worship of earth goddesses and the honoring of the receptive, nurturing aspects of existence, had been central to this understanding. The earth itself was seen as the body of the goddess, and the sacred sites were her temples, places where her power could be experienced and honored. The ancient peoples had understood that life itself was a sacred gift, that the capacity for consciousness and creativity was a divine spark that connected all beings to the source of existence. The suppression of this earth-based spirituality during the rise of patriarchal religions had created a profound disconnection between humanity and the natural world. The sacred sites had been abandoned or co-opted, their original purposes forgotten or distorted. The knowledge of how to work with earth energy had been driven underground, preserved only in secret traditions and indigenous cultures that had managed to maintain their connection to the ancient ways. But now, as humanity faced the consequences of its disconnection from the natural world, the wisdom of the ancient sites was beginning to re-emerge. The environmental crisis was forcing people to question the assumptions of industrial civilization and to rediscover the sacred relationship with the earth that their ancestors had known. The sacred sites were once again becoming places of pilgrimage and spiritual renewal. As people sought to reconnect with the deeper intelligence that had guided human civilization for millennia, the practice of earth healing, The conscious direction of human intention and energy toward the restoration of damaged ecosystems was growing around the world. Practitioners were rediscovering the ancient techniques of working with earth energy, using meditation, ritual, and ceremony to channel healing energy into areas that had been degraded by human activity. The sacred sites were serving as focal points for this work, their accumulated spiritual energy providing a reservoir of power that could be drawn upon for healing purposes. In the end, we are all children of the earth, carried by her through the vast darkness of space. The ancient sites remind us of this truth, calling us back to the sacred relationship that is our birthright and our destiny. The emergence of a new global consciousness, connected by modern communication technology but rooted in ancient wisdom, was creating unprecedented opportunities for planetary healing and transformation. Groups around the world were coordinating their efforts, performing synchronized meditations and ceremonies at sacred sites, creating a global network of spiritual energy that mirrored the ancient ley line system but operated at a much larger scale. The 2012 phenomenon, despite its commercialization and distortion, had reflected a genuine sensing that humanity was approaching a critical juncture in its evolution. The ancient Maya had understood the great cycles of time that governed the rise and fall of civilizations, and their calendar had marked the end of one age and the beginning of another. While the dramatic predictions of catastrophe had not materialized, the deeper truth of the prophecy was becoming apparent. Humanity was indeed entering a new phase of its development, one that would require a fundamental reorientation of its relationship with the natural world. The sacred sites were playing a crucial role in this transformation, serving as beacons of ancient wisdom that could guide humanity through the challenges ahead. The energy that had been dormant for centuries was beginning to stir, awakening in response to the urgent need for healing and renewal. The stones were singing again, their voices joining in a planetary chorus that called humanity back to its sacred purpose as guardians and stewards of the earth. As night fell over the ancient landscape, the stars emerged in their eternal patterns, the same constellations that had guided the builders of the megalithic monuments thousands of years ago. The sacred sites stood in silent communion with the cosmos, their stones aligned with the celestial movements that marked the passage of ages. In their enduring presence, the ancient wisdom lived on, waiting for each new generation to rediscover the sacred relationship between earth and sky, between consciousness and cosmos, between the human heart and the infinite mystery of existence. The journey through the sacred sites was not ending, but beginning. For each person who felt their power, each heart that opened to their ancient wisdom, became part of the living network of consciousness that the builders had created. The stones would continue to stand, the energy would continue to flow, and the sacred dance between earth and sky would continue through all the ages to come, carrying within it the hope and promise of humanity's return to its sacred heritage. In the gentle silence of the sacred night, where starlight blessed the ancient stones and the earth's heartbeat pulsed through ley lines older than memory, The eternal song of the sacred sites continued its whispered invitation to all who would listen, to remember, to reconnect, to return to the sacred relationship that had always been the foundation of human wisdom and the hope of the world's renewal. If this story stayed with you as you drifted off, support the channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing. We release weekly journeys into the forgotten, and every dreaming soul is welcome here.